Welcome to the biology of aging. In this course, we're going to talk about everything aging, from simple definitions to the molecular biology of the aging process. So what we're going to do in the first lecture is simply just talk about the basics of aging. What is aging? What is a good definition of aging? That is a deceptively simple question, and we will explore what it really means in a scientific context. The fountain of youth, a myth about immortality that's almost as old as mankind. It was first described as a magical spring that promises immortality, can be found all the way back to Herodotus' works, who lived around 450 BC. Almost 2,000 years later, that myth was still alive. Probably the most well-known name attached with the search for the Fountain of Youth is that of Ponce de Leon. He was an explorer who sailed through the Caribbean, and while there's really no hard evidence that he indeed specifically searched for the Fountain of Youth, he at the very least discovered Florida. And interestingly enough, seeing as how many old people live in Florida, I'd say he came pretty close to the discovery of the Fountain of Youth. Even today, people are still fascinated by that story. Just recently, Darren Aronofsky made a film about it called The Fountain, which is all about the Fountain of Youth. So, even despite all this interest in immortality, research into aging only began in earnest in the mid to late 20th century. Increased life expectancy was mostly a result of advances in medicine and nutritional science, with increasingly older population profiles, as shown here for many Western countries measured in the last century to mid-century, came the realization that we not only need to address diseases, but also the question of aging itself. One of the difficulties in addressing the problem of aging is actually in the definition. What defines aging? We all grow older, we know that. But this advancement in chronological age could be termed aging. But during the early years of your life, development and maturation take place rather than aging. So simply chronologically advancing in years is not always aging. It can be also maturation, for example. So it can't be just to add more years. Something else defines what aging is. So we can look for markers of aging. Many definitions of aging actually revolve around the breakdown of biological systems. For example, visible manifestations of the aging process could be graying hair. But even here, young people may have gray hair, so that's not a very good universal definition of aging, is it? Or take this person. How old is that person? Clearly in the left picture, that person has very, very wrinkled skin. But in fact, the person in that picture is of the same age. This is Theoden, the horse lord from Rohan from The Lord of the Rings. He's artificially aged by magic as soon as that curse is lifted and he is restored back to his normal life. That manifestation of aging, wrinkled skin, is not a good sign for how old he actually is. Or even better yet, can you guess the age of these two women? One is clearly a very young woman, maybe 15, 20 years old. The other one looks very, very old, maybe 75, 80. Well, this is a woman that suffers from a progeria, an accelerated aging disease called Werner's syndrome. In the right picture, she's 48 years old. She has symptoms of premature aging, but she's clearly still a very young woman. Even there, wrinkled skin as a biomarker or a visible marker does not tell you really how fast or how well that person is aging. Which brings us to another problem with these definitions of aging. Aging occurs on many, many levels. It happens on the levels of the molecules, happens on the level of the organ systems, to the actual whole organism. Aging is also a highly individual process. Two persons of the same chronological age may experience completely different manifestations of aging. And even between species, the aging process differs. So, one definition of aging was the breakdown of all biological systems over time. But is it all bad at all times? Well, is it truly going downhill, even after maturation ends? I'd argue that at least in humans, but evidence exists for other animals as well. Aging is not 100% process of degeneration. As we live, we continue to learn, gain experience, gain new skills, even wisdom. And these are clearly beneficial processes and beneficial skills. There's a reason why leaders, wise men and women of lore, are often more than not older individuals. If aging is indeed a universal phenomenon, then we need a definition that can be equally applied universally. If we examine populations, not individuals, this task becomes somewhat easier. On average, an aged human population will have more degenerated skin and will have more wrinkles than a younger population, and so on. But to be a universal definition, we also need to define a more broadly applicable readout that goes beyond individual aging phenotypes, such as that graying hair or that wrinkled skin. And this is where Mr. Benjamin Gompertz comes in. He was an actuarian from Victorian England. He studied mortality in a rapidly industrializing England. He found that when extrinsic life hazards, such as lethal accidents or diseases, are eliminated, the chance of dying for any given individual doubles roughly every 7 years. That means that there are some intrinsic mechanisms going on that increase the risk of death as an individual grows chronologically older. Since then, this rise in the probability of death, the mortality rate, has been observed in many species, which makes this a pretty good definition of what aging is. In the absence of extrinsic hazards, aging is the increase in the age-specific mortality rate over time. Two things should be noted here. In very old populations, this age-specific mortality rate appears to taper off and does not increase with chronological age anymore. That is, it doesn't increase as stably anymore, and sometimes it may even decrease. This has been shown in laboratory animals and even in very old humans. This is why many aging researchers actually study centenarians, people 100 years and older, to discover how this mortality rate may decrease in these extremely old individuals. The other point to be made is that sometimes some organisms show negligible senescence, that is, no increase in the age-specific mortality rate. Such organisms would grow older but not experience aging. Naturally, this is very difficult to prove. But candidates for such non-aging, essentially functionally immortal organisms have been identified. For example, the bristlecone pine, the oldest living organism on Earth, is one such organism. One tree high in the Sierra Nevada, called the Methuselah tree, is estimated to be over 5,000 years old. One other example is the ocean quahog, where individuals around 400 to 500 years have been described. Even mammals with negligible senescence exist. The naked mole rat is the longest lived rodent in the world. It has not been shown to age perceptively.